or offbeat, as it were. The question here also regarding, if we talk about reality, something that we kind of left off on in the first segment, as we were going into more about this idea that singularity not will happen. Before that, we were talking about how it's possible then that reality isn't, or does not happen, rather I should say, until it is observed. It doesn't become manifest until we have an awareness in there that can perceive something. The question then comes to a little bit to the brain, I guess, of the function of the brain. I've talked about with some other people about this on the show as well, and it would be interesting to get your take on this, Jim. And that is the fact of what the role of the brain might be here. If the brain actually is a kind of a decoder, if you will, of this program, either code running or even the at the quantum level of things, that the brain is basically an electrical circuit or unit that is decoding reality, and then we think that we are perceiving reality, through our brain. What's your take on all that, Jim? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, sure. Interesting question, and I'll put forth a hypothesis here. And if you think about, as another analogy, let's go back to, say, your favorite online video game, and let's imagine that there's a room that nobody's been in, and maybe there's even a door to the room, and all the characters have gone up to the room and they've tried to get in. They knock on the door, they push on the door, they try all of the tools at their disposal to figure out how to get into this room, and they've been unable to do it up to a certain point. So there doesn't need to be anything inside the room. The room doesn't have to be designed. There don't have to be artifacts. From the programmer's standpoint, it can just be this mysterious room that they don't have to create. They don't have to populate with anything until somebody finds a key to get into the room. And as soon as they do that, as soon as they figure out how to open the door of the room, then there has to be something there. And there always is something there, and the reason there's something there is because the key was placed for someone to find by the programmers, or because the programmer, or because the people who are playing the game have figured out a way to hack and get into the room.
Yeah.
So, if you take the same analogy and think about our reality the same way, here's one hypothesis. All of our intent is being received and recorded. So we have a reality construct. Everything that we see and everything that we can experience is basically generated by this program. But in addition, the program is able to read the intent of all of the conscious entities, all these sentient entities that are interacting with the program, and make a decision on the next state of the program based on that intent. So one individual might not have significant influence over the course of the reality or the course of events that occur in the reality, but they might have some influence because all of the intents of all of the sentient beings are being collected and assimilated. And in that way, it explains a lot. It explains why quantum effects show that reality isn't true until you observe it, because the fact of observation is the reading of the intent, and therefore then, as a result of that intent, the effect is changing the reality, or making making the waveform collapse, if you will, in quantum mechanical terms. And yet, it's also possible that a single person's intent could be chosen to cause something to happen. So you may have these aberrations or these abnormal anomalies where, a large scale, a macroscopic thing seems to occur due to your intent, and people report that all the time. I've heard cases of people who have known that an accident was coming and swerved and had no idea why they swerved, because the oncoming car was not even in their field of view. They couldn't have peripherally seen it or sensed it or anything like that. But they were given the notion to take evasive maneuvers and thus avoid an accident. This would explain explain those kinds of effects, and it would also explain why things like the Princeton pair experiments show that when global consciousness lines up and sort of becomes coherent, when everybody thinks the same thing at the same time, events seem to occur. You're probably familiar with that, where they have these eggs that have been running, basically computational devices, random number generators,
yes.
60 or 70 of them throughout the world, and they've noticed that they tend to be non-random. They tend to line up when everybody's focused on one thing, like the tsunami in Southeast Asia or 9/11,
right,
or those kinds of events. But more interesting is the fact that the aberration in the randomness of the numbers occurs before the event actually occurs.
Yes. Huh.
Why is that? And so that may be an indication that there is some, pre-knowledge of what's going on by the program, that there is some collection of intent of the individuals. There have been cases of, people doing collective intent to try to make it rain. I don't know that anybody's ever done a study to show whether that is statistically significant or not, but I've heard a lot of anecdotal cases where, thousands and thousands of people, perhaps, tens of thousands of people have concentrated on making it rain in a drought-ridden area, and within 24 hours of doing so, they get an unexpected storm that the meteorologist can't figure out.
Yes.
Well, this could be that effect. It could be the effect of your program receiving the intent of all the people and having the logic to say, okay, when this intent lines up, this is a reasonable thing, to do for the next step of the program.
But would you think also that suggests a little bit that that we're also living in a pre-programmed reality, that things are set out from the start to follow a certain line of events or happenings, as it were, that things that are happening in our world really aren't spontaneous and so forth, but this is we're on a really pre-programmed path here, so to speak.
If that were true, you'd have to accept that you have no free will, right?
Yes.
And that, I have a hard time with that concept. I used to be a believer that people didn't have free will because I viewed the brain in a reductionist way. I felt that the mind was in the brain, and the brain was basically responding purely to sensory stimuli, and basically the physical state of the brain plus all the stimuli coming in is what caused the next thought and caused the next intent to occur.
Yeah.
However, there's been a lot of recent studies that the brain, or that the mind, is not necessarily in the brain. That the mind, in fact, there was an article in New Scientist recently about that the mind is somewhere extraneous to the brain. The brain is more of a cache, if you will, of memories and processing power.
Yeah.
And that the real intent, thought process, free will may be occurring from somewhere else. So, yeah, I suppose it's possible, but if that were the case, then it would be, I think it's kind of a depressing scenario to say that everything is predestined and that we have no ability to control or influence it.
I mean, when you're tossing around like ideas like these around, when you're, juggling with these different ideas about programming, some other kind of potential sentient being or entities involved here, have you spent a lot of time thinking about the actual programmers, or programmer? And if so, what's your thought on them or it?
No, I would just have to say that if being the operative word, if we are in such a scenario, I would have to believe that the programmers are so much more advanced than us than, say, 50 years time frame, and therefore unable for us to comprehend their thought processes. Perhaps they're even not human.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, there's no way we can understand the thought process. We think we can understand the thought process of animals, of a cat or a dog, and we're constantly being surprised at how they We
Yes.
can't even understand less complicated sentient beings than ourselves, let alone ones that are so far advanced to be able to create such a programmed reality.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Why don't we spend a little time, because I don't think that we did this last time you were on the show, Jim, talking about the power of 10. This is something that you've been writing about on your website. Maybe you can give us a little bit of background or an outline of this concept of the power of 10.
Oh, sure. The power of 10 was originally, I think it came out in the 70s or 80s. It was a film that showed, basically the idea was to show 10 times magnification every, unit of time, so every second or every few seconds. So let's say you start out looking at a rose bush or something, and then you move, and you're a meter away from the rose bush, and then you move 10 meters away, and now you see, the rose bush and its surrounding areas, and then you're 100 meters away, and then 1,000 meters away, and so it's sort of an exponentially changing perspective, and it's a way to show the scale of things in a way that's understandable. People have a hard time understanding large numbers. Actually, numbers over, say, 10,000 is very difficult for people to comprehend. They know what it means to have $10,000 only because they know what it means, to buy something with $10,000.
Right.
To see 10,000 items versus 2,000 items is very difficult. It's very difficult to look at it and say, oh, that looks like 10,000, or that looks like 100,000. So, concepts of distance and the huge concepts of, universal scales are really hard to grasp. So this idea of the powers of 10 was something that, I don't remember who originally did it. It was a way to explore that and to show people the vastness of the universe and what the universe looked like at different scales. When you go far out, you're seeing the intergalactic scale where all you see is galaxies. When you go deeper and deeper in, you start to probe cells and then molecules and ultimately atoms. So this concept has been applied to a number of different video production companies have put these together. There have been websites that put them together. There are books that show powers of 10, and it's always very interesting to see. And you can go to, I think CERN has a powers of 10 application on their website, and you can just Google powers of 10, you'll find all kinds of them. I happen to be very proud of the one that I put up on the Universe Solved website because I really think it's better than any of the others out there for a number of reasons. First of all, I have to thank the people at CERN for letting me use a lot of their imagery. And some other imagery came from NASA, and some was public domain, and some were pictures that I took and things like that. But basically what it does is it explores more levels than anything else. So, one of the cosmological speculations is what happens when you get beyond the boundaries of our universe. Are there other universes out there that we theoretically can't see due to the limitations of the speed of light? This is the so-called Hubble volume of cosmology. You can only see as far as light has traveled over some period of time. But people speculate, people like Max Tegmark and other mathematicians and philosophers speculate that, hey, there could be, bubble universes out there just like ours, separated by distances that we can't perceive. Some of those may harbor life, some may not. In fact, this may explain why we appear to be in a universe that is so perfectly fine-tuned for life, is because there are so many others that aren't. And just through laws of probability, there's going to be one every once in a while that's perfectly fine-tuned as we are. That's known as the anthropic principle. Sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but I just
no, it's fine.